Hi, everyone. This is Ali Vogel on Flexible by Design. And today we are here with Yara. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you, about your role, and then we will jump into the good stuff.
Thank you, Ali. Great to be here. I'm Yara. I am the Senior Director of Product Marketing and Communications at Empathy. I'm also the very first marketer at Empathy. So I think we'll be talking through sort of both of those hats. Empathy supports families through life's most challenging moments. So we started out in 2020 supporting families through loss. Since then, we expanded to helping families plan for loss. So estate planning and everything beyond that. Most recently, we're launching sort of by the time this episode is out, our third flagship product focused on short-term disability leave. So helping employees go back to work after a leave. So all of that together makes for some really great stories to tell, some really great products to bring to market, both to families who are navigating these moments in time, but also to their employers, to their HR teams, to the insurance companies that are providing their support. So that's kind of in a nutshell my role today.
So, this is an especially exciting episode because Yara is our first marketing director as a guest. Normally on Flexible by Design, we have product designers, product leaders, and there is such a strong overlap between what is going on the product side of the business and how design is really shaped and being shaped by marketers that it was only appropriate that we start talking to some of the geniuses on the expansion and on the marketing side that are involved in really bringing these products to life and bringing them to market. So I thought of Yara because Empathy is a company that has been growing rapidly. So tell us a little bit about your journey into marketing and really how it ties in to the way that you work with design.
So I think that there's like the empathy side of the story, and there's the like how I came into it. At Empathy, from the very beginning, all of the figuring out was happening at the same time. Ron and Jan, the co founders, second time founders, so they kind of came in with really meaningful leeway to address a problem domain. And they brought on a whole bunch of great people to help figure them that. We were sitting, this was the very beginning of COVID. So everyone was isolated, and here we were brainstorming and sitting together in our little brainstorm COVID pod, which was a really great way to start a company, and thinking through sort of how to shape this problem domain from the product standpoint, from the user standpoint, from the UI standpoint, from the brand standpoint, from the storytelling standpoint. What is the media landscape? What is the public discourse? And then I think personally, I sort of found my way into marketing. My background, I was an entrepreneur. I built my own company many, many years ago when I was quite young and starting out, and at the same time, kind of navigating this new and exciting tech scene. And through various kind of tech moments and tech bubbles of let's create on demand startups, let's create community oriented startups. And I landed in this sort of impact driven role as a marketer, where at Empathy, I find that so much of the value is about telling stories and reaching people in those hard moments, but also breaking through to decision makers that are putting money towards solving these problems. So that really got me excited about doing this work.
Tell us a little bit about how this role came to be on a personal level and what the beginning stages really looked like.
I think a big part of what drew me to Empathy is the audacity to create a category and say, dealing with loss makes no sense as a topic for a startup. It is not something people want to talk about. So it's going to be really hard to market. It's not something that people look for. So it's going to be not a great product to discover. And we're going to build it anyway because we're longtime entrepreneurs and our investors believe in us. So we're going to go out and do this really hard thing where we need to go big or go home. And having that charter to go big or go home means getting empathy.com, means getting a PR agency, means getting a design agency with seed money. And that is not typically how companies spend seed money. It also means getting top tier talent in the early days and giving people who have been accustomed to managing teams and managing departments their dream job, which is like, yeah, sure, you're going to have a team and a department one day, but what you're here to do this year is to just build. We did over 100 user research calls every single day. We would have one or two family members that we would interview about their experience in analog of dealing with loss and the paperwork. and the emotional side and how it's all tangled together and what that looked like for them, we would then come together and cry about it because it's incredibly moving. Today, we all work in our own domains, but having that experience and really kind of aligning and looking each other in the eye while we're having these conversations was such an inspiring way to kick off what is continues to be a mission-oriented company, but it also really built into how do we build something where there is nothing in an era where, in 2020, it kind of felt like anything that was easy enough to build, somebody had figured out it's worth building and selling. And the only problems that were left were problems that required more than just a few lines of code and some neat UI. And that's what we signed up for.
So you talked about in the beginning, you guys had seed funding and you're like, okay, we're going to go out, we're going to find a PR agency, design agency. What was that process for you like? How did you think about the way you wanted the visual direction and the type of agency or studio that you ended up selecting to go forward with the initial brand that you guys came out with?
So, one thing that was very apparent to us when we started out is that people have a really specific set of images in mind when you talk about death and when you talk about grief and loss. And we wanted nothing to do with those images. Um, and it was really about deconstructing that, both on the product side, on the UX side, on the marketing side, on the founder side, and really having that conversation together. And I think it's pretty unique that at that stage of the company, we were doing a rebrand, but a branding project. But at the same time, it meant that so many different types of stakeholders had a seat at the table because it wasn't this siloed process that more mature companies do. How can we make this something that is meaningful for the families that are dealing with loss right now? And what do those people need? What they need is something that is feels really personalized to them. And at the same time, we have a very wide variety of users. So how can we build something that aligns with all of them, but that creates sufficient abstraction while also creating clarity and calm? And I think that standing out was a really important part of that. But even more important was being really sort of playing that important role for the families that we support of creating clarity and allowing them to feel their feelings, but to also make progress and kind of navigating both of those things.
So, normally, whenever we start a branding project with a client, we ask them to send us references of companies that they really resonate with. What were some of the initial references that you sent your design agency when you were working together for that initial branding that you came up with?
I think that a good example of what we were trying to do and how at the time we were really not thinking about who is like us, but it was more about what kind of role do we want to play for the families we support. So the CEO liked to say at the time, a phrase we've kind of moved on from was, we are the headspace for grief and the TurboTax for estate administration. So when you think about the visual language for each of those brands, it couldn't be more different. So a part of the brief was, how do we marry those two things? But a part of the brief is also, and we want to stand out, and we want to be different, and we want to build a category. And I think that maybe the final sort of fourth layer was, and we want it to be really refined. And that's something that we continue to prioritize of sort of, this needs to feel well done. This needs to feel very intentional and cohesive. And to this day, I think it's incredibly taxing to be somebody who's responsible for any kind of level of detail and empathy, because there's no such thing as an MVP for supporting families with the most like sensitive moment of their life. And if we weren't ready to like actually put tech there, it needed to be a person proper doing it.
So 5 years later, you guys are going through a rebrand. What was something that initiated this rebrand? And what are you guys starting to think about now in terms of your brand image and what you're trying to portray? And let's get specific into the visuals. Like, what are things that inspire you? What are references? What are different benchmarks that you're looking at compared to 5 years ago?
So I'd say there's some internal and some external. Some is that time has passed. We've raised our A, B, and C rounds. We have a full executive team. We have supported millions of families, and we have dozens of corporate clients. And I think the corporate clients part is a really meaningful change. And it's where we have felt our brand has been really thin and that we've needed to kind of change things as we go along and navigate this new domain that, is not new as of the last 4 years since we pivoted from B2C to B2B. But on the one hand, we want to be really unique in front of these corporate clients. But on the other hand, we do need to create confidence that we understand their needs and that we speak their language. And when we think about the commonalities between loss and leave support, it really speaks to our product roadmap that we've identified this sort of framework of emotional and practical support that is required at a really difficult time in somebody's life, and that support is provided through tech that makes things scalable and sustainable, and a care team, and that's real people that you're actually getting to talk to, because you are going to have those sort of edge cases by default in whatever situation you are going through as a family, and then experts behind the scenes that are advising this entire program. And that whole setup can be applied not just to loss, it can be applied to short term disability. And there are so many other moments in people's lives that it can be applied to, that it's really just a matter of prioritization and scale until we're sort of out there with all of these other areas. And it's now a time that the brand needs to catch up.
One of the things that I find so interesting about the relationship between a marketer and a designer is always this need to really look at the business goals, and whatever is created, it can't just be beautiful and aesthetic. What is your conversation like with the designers that you work with? What are some of the things that you bring to the meeting and to those interactions that you have to make sure that there's alignment between beautiful aesthetic design and really making sure you're hitting the goals and targets that you have as a marketer?
So I think over time, with the brand team lead and myself, really kind of building that framework and working with our teams on creating those communications together and really helping them navigate sort of a scale on how unique should this be versus how tactical does this need to be. Do we have a particular look and feel in mind for this, or does this need to really, really stand out? And I think being comfortable across more of that spectrum, that sometimes we have things that really should be incredibly unique and standing out. And sometimes we are working with a particular client on the materials that they already have and understanding that we need to fit within their criteria and their requirements. They're still going to love to see our brand. We might just need more guardrails around that. And I think an entirely different example is saying, where do we want more illustrations, but where do we actually need more stock photography to help build that empathy? But now that we're working more with B2B audiences, we actually do want to be figurative. We actually do want to help them empathize and help them understand what the end user is going to be feeling, because we're advocating for the end user. They're paying for it, but they're paying us because we bring that NPS, we bring that customer empathy, which, insurance as an industry isn't necessarily known for.
So tell me, what are some of the big priorities that you're working on right now?
So, first of all, we have this rebrand, which is incredibly exciting. And I think for the first time, we've got a really strong cadence of product and feature announcements that are coming out, and really kind of understanding how we can go bigger on all of those, and kind of navigating how to be precise and how to go big, and just kind of having those levers. We're growing to be a really big company. So to me, part of that growth is essentially working backwards from, on my communications hat, how do we work backwards from an IPO and from where a company, how do you build from Series C to IPO? That's the window that I'm thinking about. And what are some of the growth areas that we need to focus on to get us there from a storytelling perspective? So one is building out that really strong product ecosystem and making sure that on the one hand, we're super plugged in to all of our audiences, to all of our segments, but on the other hand, that we're really leveraging this to tell a big story in each and every one of those sort of momentum building moments. How do we leverage our partner relationships to build momentum and to co-market together with them? And then on the executive side, how do you build out a more rounded out executive team where you're no longer the company of the co-founders, but it's actually sort of a broader bench of people who can weigh in with different lived experience and different perspective on what we're building. So really, how do we take empathy from where it is today, and rebranding is a part of that, but how do we expand further? And as we're meeting more families and as we're signing more clients, how does that work into our messaging, our storytelling, how we're sort of meeting the market and growing our impact? So I would say that in general, my growth trajectory at Empathy, starting out and really building 0 to 1 is always my comfort zone. And Empathy has ironically been kind of moving past that comfort zone for me and trying to understand how to build more collaboratively and not just relying on market signals, but actually relying on the org structure and what other people are building and trying to kind of work within that to create impact, which is a very different sort of period in my career. I think people who've had more of a corporate or sort of mid-sized startup background have very different experiences than I do. And sort of as we evolved, my strategy as a manager, as a leader, was always working on the most ambiguous thing, sometimes the most high priority, but mostly the most ambiguous thing, figuring it out, hiring somebody who's a specialist in that area, and then onboarding, training, mentoring them, and then moving on to the next ambiguous thing. So I think over time, the people I've hired have been sort of better suited to whatever period in time they find themselves in, but there's always going to be some level of adaptability. And I'm definitely continuing to lean on that adaptability today, but I'm also leaning on what does it mean to be a leader? What does it mean to build a team, to build out a capacity? So today, our marketing team is split in two. We have a CMO who brings 20 years of experience growing and scaling at Google, at HubSpot, at BetterUp, where she was the CMO, and really kind of leaning on that perspective and expertise. And there's another leader on the marketing team who oversees our revenue marketing. So my area is everything story. So from product marketing, sales marketing, research, and PR and communications. So having that really precise story, getting to know all of our audiences and how our business works through each of them, but also how do we tell a big story? How do we build momentum? And how do we weave our way through all of those?
And then the other leader that you had mentioned, she focuses on everything that's revenue focused. So things I imagine like demand gen and working on the website and working closely
So
with the
website
sales
is actually
team.
something we see as a storytelling lever, but
Interesting. Okay.
definitely on the pipeline side of things, like the optimization of the website,
Right.
as well as the demand gen and the growth side of things, and field marketing are all on the other side of the org.
Wow, it's so interesting. We see so many different kinds of companies focused and operating in different ways. And it obviously makes a huge impact if it's B2C or B2B, and you guys have made that transition. So in the beginning, when you guys were, working with your agency and just launching the website and launching your brand, you were focused on this very B2C market and you were trying to get people to sign up, I imagine, for the empathy service. And then today you are focused on the B2B sides. And so the role has evolved and it sounds like the responsibilities have evolved. How has that been for you personally as someone who started doing everything and now your work is becoming more and more focused and specialized?
Well, it's definitely aligned with the growth of the company, and I think the impact that I've had as well. So building 0 to 1 at a company that has 3 users and 0 clients is definitely leaves a lot of room for growth, and growing in this specialized direction after I've had a chance to wear a lot of different hats. It's been really rewarding, and also feeling like on the one hand, I've got a lot of area to grow and to grow the people that I'm managing, as well as kind of having that organizational knowledge of all the different areas that I have touched and been a part of, and the people who I built relationships with over the years whose roles have also evolved, and really watching that evolution. And I think one of the most interesting places where I see myself today is in that intersection between our product and tech organization and our sales and go to market organizations, which have both evolved to be really big and different from each other, and their work practices and where they're based, and like everything is very kind of distinct and very different from each other. You know, the tech team working in sprints, which they've shifted out of. And at the time, like I belonged to one of the tech teams because they were the ones who were building the website with me. So I would participate in their dailies every morning. But on the other hand, I would fly out and meet the sales team. So kind of being that glue when we were just pivoting to B2B has definitely continued to be something that I'm very passionate about, and something that I mentor my employees to focus on, each in their own areas. Now they're sort of into specific verticals and kind of building that scale muscle. But yeah, it's been an incredibly interesting journey.
So tell me about a branding success story that you're really proud of that you took part at in empathy?
Our very first big corporate client was New York Life Insurance, one of the most memorable companies in the insurance space, a part of the New York City skyline. They have a gold gilded subway station that leads into their New York City office, much as legit as it gets. And I think from a company perspective, on the one hand, it's so exciting, but on the other hand, you're writing the press release and it's going to be very technical and that's fine. But then you're writing a blog post and you're trying to uncover sort of what is that story and how do we make this something that goes back to being mission driven. And I think really unpacking that was an incredibly rewarding moment. And it continues to be a cornerstone of our brand and of our story. But on the other hand, where empathy comes in is at a very transactional moment with a non-customer. What actually happens behind the scenes is that somebody's passed away and their family is the beneficiary of their life insurance policy, and they're going to call up or submit a claim online and request their money that is absolutely theirs from the life insurance company. And this person left behind is the beneficiary. They are not a client. They're not a customer. They don't have a relationship with the insurance company. And that's empathy's value proposition, is that we come in and we make that moment that is inherently a net negative because you're just waiting around for something that you're owed. You're just waiting for them to do their fraud validation, for them to figure out who you are, to make sure your paperwork's in order. Those are very high friction moments for something that ultimately you deserve, and they have no relationship with you that they can counter this really negative interaction with. And that is where empathy comes in. And that is our ultimate, still one of our top selling points. We are able to take that transactional moment and make it into a relationship building moment for life insurance companies. So finding a way of distilling value in a way that resonates for PR, for a blog post, for a catchphrase, but is ultimately the business messaging, and then seeing that in the blog post of our VC a few months later as something that he had taken to be part of his wording of values create value. That's my wording. So I think as a marketer, we're kind of accustomed to being behind the scenes and writing copy and lines for somebody else. But this was definitely a very rewarding moment of sort of how do we distill so many years of figuring out how do we get empathy in front of families? Because that's ultimately why we pivoted away from B2C, because families are not looking for a product when they are grieving. They are looking for it to just all go away. And maybe they're going to Google one or two tactical items they need to do. They're not looking for the big savior. They're not looking for empathy. However, when you've got life insurance companies and when you've got employers, they are supporting these families. This is where those families are. And that is our goal, to meet families where they are.
What has been a moment for you where you thought, okay, this is going to be great and successful, and actually it just didn't quite land? Tell me a little bit about an example like that if you have one.
We did equivalent work to try and come up with really meaningful, moving ways to frame some of our next partnerships. But I think the takeaway really was there isn't going to be a new, really big story with every new B2B client. And that's kind of the inherent issue that you're going to run into in B2B marketing, that you need to constantly figure out new ways to tell interesting stories. And there is a part of B2B marketing that is about telling a consistent, reliable, convincing story to sales prospects and clients and figuring out other PR levers to be fresh and to be interesting. But ultimately, you can't use that trick again. You've come up with one great tagline. Now you're going to need to look elsewhere in the business to find a new story to tell.
A lot of the marketing teams that we speak to today have dramatically transformed. So, not just in web, but also in core messaging, in the way that they're creating assets. How are you guys today thinking about the way AI is shaping the speed and the ability to really create this foundation to jump off of for creatives, for storytellers to be able to scale or even draw inspiration from what they used to do in the past and what the core messaging is? So, in your marketing organization, Have you integrated any AI workflows, tools, sources to really elevate the way that you work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that on the one hand, ultimately in B2B companies and in B2B marketing, but also just in companies beyond a certain size, there is a function of repetition and customization that is only sustainable with AI. And I think in the early days, we were willing to manually customize a lot of things for the next new sales prospect. And if it weren't for AI, at a certain point, we'd say to sales, you know what? You're on your own and we're not going to customize this for you anymore because that client doesn't need to necessarily think that everything is going to be co-branded. And being able to do things so quickly and so efficiently means that we can continue to sell to every new prospect as if they're prospect number 3, even if it means the marketing team needs to do this for the 100th time. With AI, it's definitely something doable. I think the most rewarding thing that AI has given is that it's kind of made us back to being a small startup in a sense of collaboration, because for a brainstorm, when we're able to really show each other what we mean in each other's languages, I think it also creates a lot of respect for other people's disciplines because you know just how far you can get and how much further they can take you.
I love that you called that out in the sense that now today we can dabble, but we also gain deeper respect for the craft, whether it be content writing, strategic brand messaging, visual design, especially in the marketing world. Visual design and the ability to have that level of creativity is so unbelievably important, especially when trying to stand out, as you had mentioned, but also have a refined brand and have that level of craft where it really resonates and it really takes you from being, hey, we're a seed stage startup to we're on the IPO track. That's something that cannot be underestimated. So you have gone from an entrepreneur to working at a small startup when you and I met many years ago. And now you joined a small startup that is on, let's call it, the IPO track. What is the best career advice that you've ever received?
Disregard titles and more specifically, look up the Ikigai framework. And I think be really comfortable that at different stages in your life, you might be in a different quadrant and that it's okay to play the long game and to say, want to get these 3 things from this current stage so that I can build into this other area that really interests me. So I think looking 2 moves ahead would be my recommendation.
Is there anything you want to leave our listeners with that will help them to rethink, reframe, or even just a final message that you want to share?
Thank you so much for having me. This was really interesting and really looking forward to reconnecting.
So this is Yara Baumann. She is the Senior Director of Product Marketing at Empathy. Empathy is a company that helps individuals move through the next stage of life and those around them. If you want to get in touch with Yara, follow her on LinkedIn. Thank you so much, Yara. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Allie. Bye.